Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my thoughts on the newly announced Canon EOS R mirrorless, full-frame mirrorless system and lenses. Now, first of all, I will preface this by saying this is not a hands-on review. I've got some cameras here, but these are props. I have not spent any time with hands-on to any of the EOS R system. Of course, I hope to rectify that in the near future. But I'm here more out of a response to those that are kind of soliciting my thoughts and my opinion on this newly announced system. And so if you're looking for a video that has hands-on information, then you can turn it off now and look elsewhere. However, if you're interested in my thoughts and what I perceive as I've looked through a huge amount of data and information that's come out with this release, then stay tuned. And I'm going to look at some things and kind of divide it up into things that I love about this announcement and the camera system and things that I hate about it. So let's start by looking at some things that I love. One thing that I'm really happy to see on the EOS R body is the fully articulating screen, and that is something that Canon does really well. And Sony bodies, for example, they have a tilting screen, which is better than having a fixed screen like on my 5D Mark IV. But with the tilting screen, of course, if you're shooting in any kind of portrait orientation, it's basically lost. And when it comes to use for something like vlogging, for example, the Sony tilting screen is essentially useless. It's not going to allow you to monitor anything from the front. You're going to have to look to other solutions. Canon has found a way to put the fully articulating screen to where it can swivel, tilt, it can come all the way around. And so this is going to be a very appealing option for vloggers, and of course should leapfrog it well past the 6D Mark II as a vlogging option. Beyond that, of course, is that one thing that Canon does really well, and surprisingly, Sony does really poor, and that is their implementation of their touchscreens. And so I fully anticipate that the EOS R system with a fully articulating Canon touchscreen is going to have some ergonomic advantages over Sony, even if it's down to touching the screen to focus, or even in navigating menus, all of those things. And so there's some give and take there, and I'll come back to the take in just a moment. It seems like the standout aspect of the EOS R system is going to be its implementation of autofocus. Canon has been working since the 70D to develop its DP-AF, dual pixel AF autofocus technology, which has matured into really the best in the business when it comes to use in live view type mode or in video face tracking, all of those things. I mean, Canon is the leader, and it seems like they have pushed that advantage even further by fully implementing that system in a far more robust way than ever seen before into the autofocus system for the EOS R. And so, here's kind of some of the talking points. They talk about 5,655 manually selectable AF points. Okay. Now, in and of itself, that sounds amazing for marketing, but do you really want to manually select that many points? And so let's get beyond the whole manually selecting thing. I have no interest in manually selecting out of 5,000 plus autofocus points. But what's important here is that we have got essentially coverage across the full image frame. And so you've got a highly functional autofocus system that allows you to have accurate autofocus. And of course, the advantage of this type focus system as opposed to a viewfinder phase detect autofocus is that it requires no calibration to get perfect autofocus. So it means that you've got all of these selectable points anywhere across the frame, and you have the ability to get pinpoint accuracy even with, say, the new 50mm f1.2 L series lens for that. So that's fantastic. It also notes that with a lens like the 1.2 L that's just been announced for this new mount, which is an RF mount, that it has the ability to have AF sensitivity, or to focus down in low light as low as EV-6, which is astonishing since that is literally twice as much as what the 5D Mark IV was, and that was already basically as good as what the industry allowed for at that point. So this makes the EOS R really probably the best low light focus camera system, pretty much on the market, and it certainly gives it a baked-in advantage versus the the A7R series. That while the autofocus system is impressive in them, in low light it's not as impressive, and so this gives one advantage for Canon there. It's also noted that autofocus speed is the fastest of any focus system now. And so they're saying that it can acquire focus in as little as 0.05 or 5 of a second. And so, a fraction of a second, essentially instantaneous autofocus. And they're noting that in particular with the new 24-105 f4 LIS lens, that it is going to have incredibly fast autofocus, but fast autofocus across the board. Another baked-in advantage to this autofocus system, which is a big one if you are a wildlife shooter, and that is that it supports autofocus with combinations that yield a maximum aperture as small as f11. And so think of, for example, the Canon 100-400 L Mark II with a 2 times teleconverter attached to it. Now I can't attest for how that autofocus, or not the autofocus, but the image quality would be with that kind of combination. I haven't tested that, but obviously the ability to have full accurate autofocus with that kind of combination is not achievable with the 5D Mark IV or any other Canon body right now. And so that is a new kind of class-leading performance when it comes to that. And again, an area where I think it does differentiate itself from the A7 series a little bit there. I also like the fact that it has legacy battery support. And so you're not moving to a new battery type, but rather you can use the LP-E6N or even the legacy EP6, or E6, LP-E6, and not the N version. And so there are still some advantages for using the more modern N version, but those of you that are Canon shooters that have a bunch of batteries, the great news is that you're not gonna have to go out and buy a bunch of new batteries, but you can use them here. So, kudos to Canon for that. What that also tells me is that from the very beginning, they're starting with a more robust grip on it than what Sony has. And the camera body is actually a little bit better than what, say, the A7R Mark III is that I have here. And I don't consider that to be a detriment. I consider that to be a plus, because as you can see, I've got my small rig attached to this, and that's basically to make the camera a little bit larger and a little bit better hand-sized, amongst other benefits. But I find the fact that it's, both the new Nikon Z and the new Canon EOS R, the fact that they're a little bit larger physically, and they're still smaller than an equivalent DSLR. Now, when it comes to the video production, you definitely see some advantages over, say, the Canon 5D Mark IV, maybe not quite at the Sony A7R series or A7 series. And so what we do have now is that we have clean HDMI out, which is a positive. We have MP4 codecs instead of the motion JPEG, but we also have those at different compressions, different options, which is great. That makes it more flexibility of, doing run and gun type footage. But you also still have the advantage of having C-Log baked into the camera, whereas with my 5D Mark IV, I had to pay to upgrade to have C-Log added to it. So good things there. I mean, it is 4K compatible, but 4K is capped off at 30 frames per second. And as I'll note, some of the other aspects of video aren't still as fully realized as what they are on the Sony side. And we'll come back to that in the negatives. Another positive, of course, is the fact that Canon is launching with 4 significant lenses, not just kind of throw-in type lenses, get some glass out there, but really pro-level lenses that show that Canon is very invested in this process. And so, one of the uphill battles that the A7 series had when it came out is that there really wasn't any kind of professional grade lenses to put on there. So you have this amazing, sensor, but not the glass to put in front of it. And so, Canon has been smart about that. So they're launching with 4 lenses, One of those is, kind of, you can tell that it's borrowed some design from the existing 35 millimeter macro lens. This is a 35 millimeter f1.8 macro. It has image stabilization. That's kind of the budget option at under 500 bucks. Then there is a very important 24-105 f4L IS that's designed for this new mount. And of course, that's the bread and butter kit lens that will provide good enough image quality for most people. And it will also, give a very flexible focal range, and that's priced somewhere comparably to the DSLR version, a little over $1,000. But then there are also two hardcore lenses: a 50 millimeter f1.2 L series lens, and then a new world first standard zoom that has a larger than f2.8 maximum aperture. So it's a 28 to 70 millimeter f2. And so it's a huge lens, and it's an expensive lens, as we'll get to in just a second. But the advantage, of course, is that this is, shows that Canon is very much going for, the wedding crowd and portrait photographer crowd, and even fashion photography crowd, with a very serious, very flexible zoom like that. And so, yeah, it's going to be big and it's going to be heavy, but it's also going to be awesome. And so that's another thing that I think is good, that they're launching with serious lenses, and that shows seriousness of intent. And so kudos to Canon when it comes to that. And I would say that the lineup that they're launching with is certainly more attractive to my way of thinking than with Nikon with their new Z series lenses. It also looks like the weather sealing is going to be more robust than that of Sony, and it's not necessarily surprising. That's something that Canon and Nikon have done very well historically, and Sony is getting better at. And so I think, though, that Canon will have an advantage there out of the box. The final plus I want to point to is the price. At $2,300, this is competitive with the A7 III. And it is offering higher resolution at 30 megapixels, and so it's essentially same resolution as the 5D Mark IV, but compares to the 24 megapixels of the A7 III. It also has a higher resolution viewfinder, which is more akin to that is found on the A7R Mark III. And so, if you look at it within Canon's own system, you're basically getting a mirrorless version of the 5D Mark IV with some improvements at a $1,000 discount. And so I think they've done a good job with pricing that. Now, some things that I hate. First thing is that there is no mention of Embody image stabilization. This is, I think, a huge advantage for Sony, which has gotten better and better with the implementation of their Embody image stabilization. And Canon has always maintained the position that you're going to get the best image stabilization from an image stabilizer that is tuned to the lens. And that sounds like a very valid argument, but I have to say that in practice, I have found that the Embody image stabilization works really well. And for the way that I use cameras, I can't tell a difference between it and a good IS system that's built right into a lens. And so I think that Canon is missing the boat here, because one thing that I was anticipating, that if this camera had Embody image stabilization, it becomes a really attractive platform. For example, all of my manual focus lenses. Mirrorless cameras are better anyway for that. But the advantage here on Sony is, for example, if I throw my beloved Zeiss Milvus 135 millimeter f2 on there via adapter, and all of a sudden I've not only got all of those manual focus aids, I've got a stabilized 135 millimeter f2, and it works really well. And so this, to me, is a missed opportunity for Canon that I hope that they rectify in the future. And it seems like, obviously several of the lenses that they launched, 2 of the 4 lenses at launch, have image stabilization. And so it seems like they're still kind of continuing with that plan. But I hope that they augment that with a system in the future that has in-body image stabilization. Yeah, they have their, movie digital IS, but it's not an optical stabilization, it's a digital stabilization. And frankly, I've tested bodies with it. I'm not particularly impressed with what it does. And frankly, I'm far more concerned. I do most of my video work either from a tripod or from a a motorized gimbal. And so image stabilization is actually less important to me for video than it is for stills. And so I wish that Canon would have done that. I also noted that you're getting less physical controls on this new camera. Now they have implemented a new kind of touch bar that, the jury is out whether or not that's going to be more of a gimmick or something very useful. But there is no really good control dial, nor is there a thumbstick on that. And so my immediate thought was, you've got 5,000 plus manually selectable autofocus points, and you don't really have a lot of great physical controls for accessing those. So I'm surmising that a lot of that is going to be mapped to the touchscreen, and Canon has done a good job with allowing you to either select points or move, kind of a flexi point around using the touchscreen. They are now also implementing a new control ring on RF lenses, so that you could, for example, control aperture, let's say, right from that ring, which is clever and good, and it sounds like it's implemented well. But of course, that is going to require some ergonomic adjustment for those that are accustomed to, controlling these things on the camera. And so, the jury is out in my mind until I've used it and got familiar with it, whether or not the ergonomics are going to be pleasing to me on that. They also, of course, launched with a single SD card. And so good news is that it's USH2 compatible, so you can put, higher performance cards in there. That's positive. But of course, there's a lot of working professionals that just aren't willing to forego a second card slot. If they're doing work, that's paying work, that they only have one chance to get it right, they're just not interested in the risk of having a card failure as a part of that. And for myself, I set up my cameras to where, I record JPEGs to one card, and then I record RAW files to another card. And that gives me the option of what I'm going to pull out and how I'm going to use it, depending upon the situation. And so, Sony managed to do it even on the A7 III, and I think both Canon and Nikon have unnecessarily shrunk their market, limited their market somewhat by the implementation of just one card. I also have noted, again, I haven't tested it yet, that while there is face tracking and there is some version of IAF, which of course is one of the things that makes Canon or Sony bodies right now great. IAF is fantastic. But from what I understand, IAF is not actually a tracking, and so you can lock on, you can take the photo, but you can't, kind of track the eye as it moves around. And so, not surprising if Canon is implementing this technology. It took Sony a little while to fully realize that. That's probably going to be true with Canon as well, but it also demonstrates why kind of holding off so long and getting into the mirrorless market is going to be a bit of a liability for Canon and for Nikon for that matter, because they're going to have to play catch up and work through all of the logistical challenges that Sony did, whereas Sony bodies are just getting better and better with every generation. And so it is going to provide somewhat of a competitive edge for them. Other thing that I noted that I think is kind of a negative is that, one of the technologies that Canon really touted with the launch of the 5D Mark IV 2 years ago was the new dual pixel RAW, which was supposed to allow you to do micro adjustment, after the photo was taken, or play with the bokeh, or, different things. And the reality is that the actual changes you can make proved to be somewhat minuscule. Now, other, kind of third parties have discovered that there is actually a lot of other possibilities inherent in that, maybe even different EV values that could be extracted from a single file. So it seems like there is potential in the dual pixel RAW technology, but it doesn't seem like Canon has furthered that themselves in any way, shape, or form. You're still locked into having to use Canon, DPP to, Digital Photography Pro to use that software to unlock that technology at all. And so I would think after 2 years they might have been able to. It seemed like there's promise to the technology, but Canon doesn't seem to have furthered it at any point in the last couple of years. Now, another, negative to some degree is a lot of Canon shooters, their number one wish list is that when Canon brought out full frame mirrorless, they would design it somehow where the EF mount was natively supported. That didn't happen. And I understand with the different flange distance, it is, technically difficult to accomplish. And, Canon is touting that this new RF mount gives them a lot more development potential. Very likely true. But just note that you are going to have to use adapters to use your existing EF and EFS lenses. Now, the good news is that Canon says that these are all supported, so that's a positive, but you are going to have to use adapters to do them. Now, interestingly, however, on this note, Canon is launching 3 different flavors of adapters. Kind of a straight up, just do the job adapter. A second adapter that adds a control ring like that which is found on, the native RF mount lenses. And so that could be interesting. You could use that for aperture or ISO, or you can program it to whatever functionality that you want. But the most interesting, I would say, is the third and most expensive one. And that is one that will allow you to use drop-in filters, both circular polarizer or neutral density filters, right into that, which means that some lenses where it was impossible to use filters before, you now have the option of doing them in what is akin to a rear mount filter, but probably better implemented than what a simple gel filter might be. And so, I think at least Canon has managed to turn this into a potential positive. And of course, I'm very much interested in seeing how native autofocus performance is when it comes to using those adapters. My final negative as I wrap this up is that the price of lenses in typical Canon fashion is somewhat cringe-worthy. And most notably, the more professional grade lenses. The new 50mm f1.2, its MSRP is basically $2,300, which makes it a $700 to $800 premium plus over the existing EF mount 50mm f1.2. And so that's a very, very expensive lens, obviously, for a 50mm prime. And then beyond that, the new 28 to 70 f2, yes, which is a class-leading unique lens, but it's also going to come at a price point of $3,000. And so there certainly will be some sticker shock for those that are contemplating purchasing some new lenses to go with their system. That 2 of the 4 announced lenses are in excess of $2,000 and 3 of the 4 are in excess of $1,000. And so kind of like what Sony has done, you've got a relatively affordable camera body, and then you've got some very expensive glass to put in front of it. The good news, of course, is that for a lot of Canon shooters, hopefully they'll be able to utilize their existing Canon lenses in a better fashion than what they can, moving them onto a Sony body, for example. The jury is out, and I'll be back to you as soon as I can with everything that I can do as far as reviewing camera, lenses, etc. as we move ahead. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, look in the description down below, and I do have links to all of the new announcements. And so if you want to get pre-orders in on things, if you want to get on board, you're welcome to do so there. Of course, you can also follow me on social media. You can become a patron. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.